Joseph Miller thought cleaning office buildings after midnight would be the most boring job in the world. He was wrong. What he discovered in the executive suite of Thomson Industries at 2:47 a.m. would shatter a powerful family's carefully constructed lies and expose a wedding secret so devastating it would make headlines across Chicago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The missing persons case that had puzzled police for 6 months was about to be solved by a janitor with a mop bucket and a desperate need to provide for his sick daughter. But this isn't just another missing persons story. This is about how one man's refusal to look the other way would expose the dark truth behind Chicago's most celebrated power couple, and how sometimes the people society overlooks are the only ones willing to fight for justice. Joseph Miller pushed his cleaning cart through the marble lobby of Thomson Industries, the wheels squeaking softly in the pre-dawn silence. At 32, his hands already bore the calluses of too many jobs and too little sleep. The security guard barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle as Joseph badged in for another night shift. 6 months of cleaning these offices, and he'd become invisible to everyone who mattered. That invisibility would prove to be his greatest asset. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor gave him time to think about Emma. His 7-year-old daughter was sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, watched over by Mrs. Garcia, their neighbor who refused payment but accepted Joseph's homemade tamales as fair trade. Emma's asthma had been acting up again, and the medication costs were climbing faster than his ability to pay them. This night shift at Thomson Industries paid better than most, but it still wasn't enough. Nothing ever seemed to be enough. Thomson Industries dominated the Chicago skyline, its glass and steel tower a monument to technological innovation and corporate success. Rachel Thompson had built the company from nothing, transforming a small software startup into a billion-dollar empire specializing in artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Her engagement to David Chen, her business partner and fellow tech genius, had been front-page news in the business section. The wedding was scheduled for this Saturday at the Marriott downtown, promising to be the social event of the season. Joseph began his routine in the lower floors, working methodically through conference rooms and cubicles. His previous life as a military intelligence analyst had trained him to notice details others missed: the way papers were arranged on desks, the subtle signs of stress and discarded coffee cups, the passwords carelessly written on sticky notes. His security clearance had been revoked 3 years ago, following a bureaucratic nightmare that cost him his career and his marriage. But old habits died hard. The executive floor always came last when the building was truly empty. Joseph had learned that senior executives often worked late into the evening, and he preferred to avoid awkward encounters with people who saw custodial staff as part of the furniture. Tonight felt different, though. The usual hum of activity was replaced by an odd tension that seemed to permeate the air itself. Rachel Thompson's corner office was a study in controlled elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Lake Michigan, while awards and commendations lined the walls in perfect symmetry. Joseph had cleaned this office dozens of times, always careful not to disturb the precisely arranged desk or the family photos that displayed what appeared to be a perfect life. Tonight, something was out of place. The normally immaculate desk was cluttered with scattered papers, and Rachel's computer screen glowed with an urgency that seemed at odds with the late hour. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. More concerning was the framed photo that usually sat prominently near her monitor, the one showing Rachel with a younger woman who shared her striking green eyes and determined smile. The frame lay face down, as if someone had deliberately hidden the image from view. Joseph's instincts kicked in before his rational mind could object. He glanced toward the door, confirming he was alone, then carefully lifted the frame. The photo showed Rachel Thompson and another woman in what appeared to be a recent family gathering. The resemblance was unmistakable, sisters sharing the same confident bearing and successful appearance. Joseph had seen this photo countless times during his cleaning routine, but tonight he noticed something he'd missed before. There was a small notation in the corner, barely visible unless you looked closely. Anna and me, Christmas 2023, before everything changed. The computer screen drew his attention next. Unlike the other executive offices, Rachel's computer had been left on, displaying what appeared to be a private email thread. Joseph knew he should continue cleaning and mind his own business, but years of intelligence training had taught him to recognize when information wanted to be found. The subject line read, "Anna, final warning," and the timestamp showed messages continuing well past midnight. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Garcia. "Emma had a breathing episode. She's stable now, but the inhaler isn't working as well. Doctor wants to see her tomorrow." Joseph's heart clenched as he read the message. Another doctor's visit meant another bill he couldn't afford, another reminder that his daughter's health hung in the balance while he scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. He was about to pocket his phone when movement outside the office caught his eye. Through the glass partition, he could see someone moving through the adjacent conference room. At this hour, the building should have been empty except for security and cleaning staff. Joseph quickly turned off his cart's overhead light and moved closer to the window, his military training automatically engaging as he assessed the potential threat. The figure was tall and well-dressed, moving with the confident stride of someone who belonged in these spaces. As the person stepped into better lighting, Joseph recognized David Chen, Rachel's fiancé and business partner. Chen appeared agitated, speaking animatedly into his phone while pacing the conference room. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd been wearing it for days. Joseph's curiosity overcame his caution as he strained to catch fragments of Chen's conversation through the glass. The words "sister" and "wedding" were clearly audible, followed by what sounded like threats rather than negotiations. Chen's body language suggested desperation masked by anger, the kind of combination that led to poor decisions and dangerous actions. The pieces of a puzzle began forming in Joseph's mind, connections that his analytical background couldn't ignore. A missing sister, a disrupted office, and a fiancé making mysterious phone calls in the middle of the night. The story that Chicago's society pages had been celebrating suddenly felt like a carefully constructed lie built on something much darker. Joseph remained motionless behind the glass partition, watching David Chen pace the conference room like a caged predator. The man's phone conversation had grown more heated, his voice rising to levels that carried through the soundproofed walls. Joseph's military intelligence background kicked into high gear as he processed what he was witnessing. Chen's behavior was all wrong for a successful businessman preparing for his wedding in 3 days. The conversation ended abruptly, and Chen hurled his phone against the conference table with enough force to crack the screen. Joseph watched as the man collapsed into a leather chair, burying his face in his hands. For a moment, the polished exterior cracked completely, revealing something that looked disturbingly like guilt mixed with panic. Joseph had seen that expression before, during interrogations when subjects realized their carefully constructed lies were about to unravel. Chen suddenly straightened and pulled out a second phone, this one appearing to be a burner device. The fact that Chicago's golden boy was using untraceable communication suggested this went far beyond simple business dealings. Joseph adjusted his position to get a better view. His cleaning cart provided perfect cover. The custodial uniform that made him invisible to the corporate elite now served as the perfect camouflage for surveillance. The second phone call was brief but intense. Joseph caught fragments through the glass. Thursday night, the warehouse district, and most chillingly, make sure she can't talk. The implications sent ice through Joseph's veins. Anna Thompson wasn't just missing. She was being held somewhere, and her own sister's fiancé was involved in keeping her silent. Chen ended the call and stood, smoothing his suit jacket back into its usual pristine condition. The transformation was remarkable, watching the desperate man disappear behind the mask of corporate success. Within seconds, David Chen looked like himself again, the picture of a successful entrepreneur preparing for his fairy tale wedding. Only Joseph had witnessed the cracks in the facade. As Chen moved toward the elevator, Joseph made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing his cleaning routine, he abandoned his cart and followed at a safe distance. His years of intelligence work had taught him that information was only valuable if you knew how to act on it. Anna Thompson was in danger, and Joseph appeared to be the only person in a position to help her. The elevator descended to the parking garage where Chen's black Tesla waited in its reserved executive spot. Joseph took the stairs, emerging just in time to see the taillights disappearing into the Chicago night. He memorized the license plate, though he suspected it wouldn't lead anywhere useful. Men like Chen didn't make amateur mistakes when it came to covering their tracks. Back in his small apartment, Joseph sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd witnessed. Emma slept peacefully in the next room, her breathing steady but still requiring the occasional assist from her inhaler. Mrs. Garcia had left a note about the evening's breathing episode and along with strict instructions to call Emma's doctor first thing in the morning. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, worried about affording his daughter's medical bills while stumbling onto a conspiracy that could potentially involve millions of dollars and a woman's life. Joseph had learned the hard way that doing the right thing often came with a steep personal cost. His military career had ended because he'd refused to falsify intelligence reports to support a politically motivated operation. That integrity had cost him his clearance, his marriage, and his financial security. But integrity was all he had left, and Anna Thompson needed someone willing to use it. Joseph opened his laptop, the ancient machine whirring to life with protests that suggested its days were numbered. His security clearance might be gone, but his contacts weren't completely dead. More importantly, his skills in data analysis and pattern recognition remained sharp despite 3 years of disuse. If Chen was involved in Anna's disappearance, there would be digital footprints. There always were. The official missing person report for Anna Thompson painted a frustratingly vague picture. She had last been seen leaving her apartment 6 months ago, supposedly heading to a spa retreat in California. Her credit card showed charges along the route west, then nothing. No hotel registrations, no return flight, no contact with family or friends. The police had investigated the spa, finding that Anna had never arrived despite having a confirmed reservation. Seemed to have generated minimal media attention. In a city where missing person cases often became headline news, Anna's disappearance had been relegated to brief mentions in the back pages of local newspapers. Joseph dug deeper, using skills that felt both familiar and rusty after years of disuse. Anna Thompson had been more than just Rachel's sister. She'd been the original co-founder of Thompson Industries, holding a 40% stake in the company when it was incorporated. Financial documents showed that her stake had been bought out just 2 weeks before her disappearance, with the money transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. The timing was suspicious enough to raise red flags, but the buyer's identity made Joseph's blood run cold. David Chen had purchased Anna's shares through a series of shell companies, essentially paying her to disappear from the company structure. The sale had given Chen controlling interest in Thompson Industries when combined with his existing partnership with Rachel. Joseph leaned back in his chair, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a disturbing picture. Anna hadn't just disappeared. She'd been bought out of her own company and then vanished before she could potentially interfere with Chen's plans. The upcoming wedding wasn't just a romantic celebration. It was the final step in a hostile takeover that would give Chen complete control of a billion-dollar empire. But something had gone wrong with the plan. The frantic phone calls, the desperate behavior, the references to keeping Anna quiet suggested she'd found a way to threaten Chen's carefully orchestrated scheme. Perhaps she'd tried to return for her sister's wedding. Perhaps she'd discovered something that could expose the truth about her forced departure from the company. Joseph's phone rang, jarring him from his analysis. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was the same voice he'd heard through the glass partition, now speaking directly to him with cold precision. "Mr. Miller," David Chen said, his tone carrying the subtle menace of someone accustomed to getting his way. I believe we need to have a conversation." The fact that Chen knew his name sent alarm bells ringing through Joseph's mind. Corporate executives didn't typically know the names of night shift custodial staff, which meant Chen had done his homework. Joseph's military background had taught him that when your cover was blown, your options became very limited very quickly. "I'm not sure what you mean," Joseph replied carefully, his mind racing through possible responses and their likely outcomes. Shen's laugh was devoid of humor. "You were very thorough in your research tonight, Mr. Miller. Impressive work for someone whose official employment history shows 3 years of manual labor. But then former military intelligence analysts often find civilian work rather beneath their skill set, don't they?" The casual mention of his classified background confirmed Joseph's worst fears. Chen hadn't just discovered his identity. He'd accessed information that should have been buried deeper than most government agencies could reach. The level of resources required for that kind of background check suggested connections that went far beyond the corporate world. "You have something that belongs to me. Information that could be misinterpreted by people who don't understand the complexities of business acquisitions. I'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." Joseph understood the veiled threat perfectly. Chen was offering him money to forget what he'd witnessed, with the implied consequence that refusing the offer would result in significantly less pleasant alternatives. The man who'd seemed desperate in the conference room was now demonstrating the calculated ruthlessness that had built his fortune. "I'm listening," Joseph said, knowing that agreeing to meet was dangerous, but recognizing that he needed more information to help Anna Thompson. "Excellent. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock, Navy Pier. Come alone. And, Mr. Miller, I strongly advise you to consider your daughter's future when making your decision. Emma is such a lovely child, and children with chronic health conditions require so much stability in their lives." The line went dead, leaving Joseph staring at his phone in fury and fear. The threat against Emma had been delivered with surgical precision, designed to paralyze him with parental terror. Chen had done more than just research Joseph's background. He'd identified the one pressure point that could control him completely. Joseph walked to Emma's bedroom, watching his daughter sleep with the innocent peace that only children could achieve. Her breathing was steady now, but he could see her inhaler within easy reach on the nightstand. Every parent's nightmare was having their child used as leverage, and Chen had made it clear that Emma's safety depended on Joseph's cooperation. But Joseph had learned something important during his years in military intelligence. The people who made threats against families usually did so because they were running out of other options. Jen's desperation in the conference room hadn't been an act. Something about Anna's situation was spiraling out of his control, and he needed Joseph's silence to keep his plans on track. That desperation might be the key to saving Anna Thompson and protecting his own daughter. Joseph just had to figure out how to use it without getting them all killed in the process. Joseph barely slept that night, his mind churning through scenarios and contingencies. By dawn, he'd made a decision that went against every paternal instinct screaming at him to protect Emma above all else. He couldn't save his daughter by abandoning Anna Thompson to whatever fate Chen had planned. The military had taught him that sometimes the only way to protect what you loved was to go on the offensive. Mrs. Garcia arrived at 7 sharp, as she had every morning for the past 2 years. The elderly woman had become more than just a babysitter. She was Emma's surrogate grandmother, the stable female presence his daughter desperately needed after her mother had walked away from their family. Joseph trusted Mrs. Garcia with Emma's life, but he couldn't bring himself to explain why today might be more dangerous than usual. "You look terrible, mijo," Mrs. Garcia observed, studying Joseph's face with the kind of maternal perception that missed nothing. "Something is wrong." Joseph poured her a cup of coffee, buying himself time to choose his words carefully. "I might need you to keep Emma overnight tonight. There's something I have to take care of, and it might run late." Mrs. Garcia's expression sharpened. At 73, she'd raised 6 children and buried a husband who'd worked dangerous construction jobs for 40 years. She recognized the look of a man walking into trouble. This something, it has to do with that job of yours." "In a way," Joseph admitted. "Mrs. Garcia, if anything happens to me, there's an envelope in my desk drawer with Emma's medical information and emergency contacts. My sister in Denver would take her if needed." The older woman set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Joseph Miguel Miller, you listen to me. That little girl has already lost one parent. She cannot lose another. Whatever foolish thing you are planning, you find another way." Joseph knelt beside her chair, taking her weathered hands in his. "There's a woman in trouble, Mrs. Garcia, someone who can't help herself. If I don't do something, she might die, and the man responsible will get away with it. How do I explain that to Emma when she's old enough to understand? How do I teach her to stand up for what's right if I'm too afraid to do it myself?" The older woman studied his face for a long moment, then sighed with the resignation of someone who'd argued with stubborn men before. "Your father was the same way, God rest his soul. Very much honor for his own good. Very well, but you come back to that little girl, you hear me? She needs her papa." Joseph spent the morning researching everything he could about David Chen and Thompson Industries.
Rachel Thompson. If Chen was manipulating her sister's disappearance for financial gain, Rachel herself might be an unwitting victim. The woman who'd built Thompson Industries from nothing deserved to know that her upcoming marriage was built on betrayal and potentially murder. Rachel Thompson's public persona was that of a self-made tech pioneer, but Joseph's deeper investigation revealed a more complex story. She'd founded the company with Anna, but their partnership had been far from equal. Anna had provided the initial capital and business connections through her work in venture capital, while Rachel had contributed the technical expertise and vision. The sisters had built their empire together, making Anna's sudden departure from the company even more suspicious. Financial records showed that Rachel had been genuinely surprised by Anna's decision to sell her shares. Email threads between the sisters, obtained through social media cross-referencing, revealed Rachel's confusion and hurt at Anna's abrupt withdrawal from both the company and their personal relationship. Rachel had genuinely believed Anna was taking a sabbatical to find herself, not fleeing from threats or coercion. Joseph's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Warehouse District, Pier 47, 11 p.m. Come alone if you want to see Anna alive." The message was followed by a photo that made his blood run cold. Anna Thompson sat tied to a chair in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse, her eyes reflecting a combination of defiance and terror that Joseph recognized from his own experience as a prisoner of war. The game had changed. Chen wasn't just offering him money to stay quiet. He was using Anna as bait to draw Joseph into a trap. The businessman had made a crucial mistake, though. He'd revealed that Anna was still alive and had shown Joseph exactly where she was being held. Military intelligence had taught Joseph that information was power, even when it came wrapped in threats. Joseph called in sick to his day job at the elementary school, claiming a family emergency that required his immediate attention. The life felt appropriate, given that he was potentially about to save someone's family from destruction. He spent the afternoon conducting reconnaissance of the warehouse district, using skills he'd hoped never to need again. Pier 47 sat at the edge of Chicago's industrial waterfront, a maze of abandoned buildings and rusted shipping containers that provided perfect cover for illegal activities. The warehouse in question was a 3-story brick building that had been empty for years, its windows boarded and its parking lot cracked with neglect. Joseph identified 3 possible entry points and 2 escape routes, though he suspected Chen had planned for both contingencies. As evening approached, Joseph made a decision that would have horrified his military commanders. Instead of going to Navy Pier to meet Chen as instructed, he was going to attempt a rescue operation at the warehouse. It was exactly the kind of reckless heroics that got soldiers killed, but Joseph was no longer a soldier. He was a father who understood that sometimes protecting your family meant taking impossible risks. The warehouse district after dark was a landscape of shadows and industrial decay. Joseph moved through the maze of buildings with practiced stealth, his black clothing helping him blend into the darkness. The military had trained him for urban warfare, but this felt different, personal. He wasn't following orders or serving national interests. He was choosing to risk everything for a woman he'd never met because it was the right thing to do. The warehouse itself was as foreboding as it had appeared in the surveillance photo. Joseph could see light emanating from the second-floor windows, casting long rectangles of illumination across the cracked pavement below. Two cars sat in the parking lot, Chen's black Tesla and a nondescript sedan that probably belonged to whoever was guarding Anna. Joseph scaled the fire escape with careful precision, each movement calculated to avoid the creaking metal that would announce his presence. The second-floor windows were partially boarded, but gaps in the plywood allowed him to see inside. Anna Thompson sat exactly where she'd appeared in the photograph, though her condition had clearly deteriorated. Her designer clothes were torn and dirty, and her face showed the strain of prolonged captivity. Two men stood guard over her. Their posture and bearing suggested professional security rather than common criminals. They recognized the type from his military days. Ex-military or ex-police, men who'd found more lucrative employment in the private sector where questions about methods were rarely asked. They were armed and alert, making a direct assault essentially suicidal. Chen himself was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was either planning to arrive later or had positioned himself elsewhere in the building. Joseph needed to assume the worst-case scenario and plan accordingly. If Chen had set this up as a trap for him, there would be additional security positioned to prevent his escape. Joseph's phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unknown number. He answered quietly, knowing that failing to respond might endanger Anna further. "Mr. Miller." Chen's voice was calm and controlled, the sound of a man who believed he held all the advantages. "I'm disappointed that you chose not to meet me at Navy Pier. I had hoped we could resolve this matter like civilized businessmen." "I'm listening," Joseph replied, keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "You're currently positioned on the fire escape of the warehouse at Pier 47. An impressive bit of reconnaissance work, but ultimately pointless. You see, Mr. Miller, Anna Thompson is going to disappear tonight regardless of what you do. The only variable is whether your daughter grows up as an orphan." Joseph felt ice form in his stomach. "Emma is with Mrs. Garcia. She's safe." Chen's laugh was genuinely amused. Mrs. Garcia is currently tied up in her own living room, wondering why two men in business suits are asking about her young friend's father. She's unharmed for now, but her continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. The revelation hit Joseph like a physical blow. He'd walked into a trap that was far more sophisticated than he had imagined. Chen had not just been planning to silence him. He'd been orchestrating the complete elimination of everyone who posed a threat to his carefully constructed scheme. "What do you want?" Joseph asked, though he already knew the answer would involve choices that no father should ever have to make. "Simple," Chen replied. "You're going to walk into that warehouse and sit down beside Miss Thompson. My associates will ensure that both of you disappear permanently, and the tragic story of the missing sister and the deceased janitor will never trouble anyone again. In exchange, your daughter will wake up tomorrow morning safe in Mrs. Garcia's care, none the wiser about her father's heroic but ultimately futile gesture." Joseph closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on him. Save Anna and condemn Emma to grow up without a father? Save Emma and let Anna die for the crime of threatening a corrupt man's wedding plans? There had to be a third option, something his military training had prepared him for. But the parameters of this mission seemed to be designed to prevent any scenario where everyone survived. "You have 5 minutes to decide, Mr. Miller," Chen continued. "After that, I'm afraid the offer expires and we'll be forced to explore less pleasant alternatives for both Miss Thompson and your daughter." Joseph's mind raced through every tactical scenario he'd ever studied, searching for a solution that
Didn't require sacrificing one innocent life for another. 5 minutes wasn't enough time for a conventional rescue operation, but it might be sufficient for something Chen wouldn't expect. Joseph had spent years in military intelligence, and one lesson had been burned into his consciousness. When facing an enemy who thinks they control all variables, introduce chaos into their carefully ordered system. He pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly, sending a series of text messages to contacts he hadn't communicated with in 3 years. Former military colleagues who'd gone into private security, investigative journalists who specialized in corporate corruption, and, most importantly, Detective Sarah Brooks at the Chicago Police Department. Brooks had worked Anna's missing person case and had never been satisfied with how quickly the investigation had stalled. The messages were brief but specific. Thompson Industries CEO David Chen holding Anna Thompson Warehouse, Pier 47, second floor. Armed guards. Also threatening 7-year-old Emma Miller and elderly woman Mrs. Garcia at 2847 Lincoln Avenue. Need immediate backup all locations. Evidence of corporate fraud and kidnapping. This is Joseph Miller, former Army intelligence. Sending proof now. Joseph attached the photo Chen had sent him of Anna, along with screenshots of the financial documents showing Chen's suspicious stock purchase. He also included a recording he'd made of Chen's phone call, grateful that military paranoia had led him to start recording once he'd recognized the man's voice. The responses came faster than he'd expected. Brooks replied within 30 seconds. Units dispatched both locations. Hold position until backup arrives. Two former military contacts confirmed they were en route to the warehouse district. Most surprisingly, Amanda Foster, an investigative reporter for the Chicago Tribune, responded that she'd been investigating Thompson Industries for weeks and was already in the warehouse district with a photographer. Chen's voice crackled through Joseph's phone again. 2 minutes remaining, Mr. Miller. I trust you're not planning anything foolish. My associates at Mrs. Garcia's residence are quite capable of making your daughter an orphan within seconds of receiving the appropriate signal. Joseph began moving toward the warehouse entrance, but not for the reasons Chen expected. If he could create enough confusion to buy time for the police response, he might be able to save everyone. The key was making Chen believe he was surrendering while actually drawing the man's security away from their positions. I'm coming in, Joseph said into the phone, his voice carrying just the right mixture of defeat and desperation. But I want proof that Emma and Mrs. Garcia are safe first. Of course, Chen replied smoothly. I'm a businessman, not a monster. Surely you understand that this is simply about protecting my investments. Joseph's phone buzzed with an incoming video call. The screen showed Emma sitting on Mrs. Garcia's couch, both of them appearing unharmed, but clearly frightened. Two men in expensive suits flanked them, their weapons visible but not directly threatening. Emma clutched her inhaler in one small hand, her eyes wide with the kind of confusion that only children experience when adult conflicts shattered their sense of security. Daddy? Emma's voice was small and scared, cutting through Joseph's heart like a blade. These men said you're in trouble. I want to come home. I know, sweetheart. Mrs. Garcia is taking good care of you, right? I'm going to fix this, and then we'll go home together. Chen ended the video call abruptly. Touching. Now, Mr. Miller, please proceed to the warehouse entrance. My associates are waiting to escort you inside. Joseph entered the building through the main entrance, his hands raised to show he wasn't carrying weapons. The two guards he'd observed through the window were waiting for him. Their professional demeanor suggested they'd done this kind of work before. One gestured toward the stairs leading to the second floor, while the other positioned himself to cut off any potential retreat. The second floor had been converted into a makeshift holding area, with Anna Thompson secured to a metal chair in the center of an otherwise empty room. She looked up as Joseph entered, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and resignation. Up close, the family resemblance to Rachel was even more striking, though months of captivity had taken their toll on her appearance. Mr. Miller, Anna said, her voice hoarse but determined. I'm sorry you got involved in this. David has gone completely insane since my sister accepted his marriage proposal. He thinks I'm going to expose his financial manipulations at the wedding. Joseph moved closer, studying the restraints holding Anna to the chair. The ropes were professionally tied, but not impossible to untie given enough time and distraction. Are you going to expose him? Anna's smile was grim but satisfied. I've been documenting his embezzlement from Thompson Industries for 8 months. Hidden cameras, recorded conversations, financial records he thought he'd destroyed. David has been systematically stealing from the company while positioning himself to take complete control through marriage to my sister. One of the guards stepped forward. That's enough talking. Mr. Chen will be here soon to conclude this business. Joseph nodded toward Anna's bonds. At least let me untie her. She's not going anywhere with 2 armed men watching. The guard considered this, then gestured for Joseph to proceed. It was exactly the opening Joseph had been hoping for. As he worked on Anna's restraints, he whispered quickly, Police are coming. When I give the signal, get to the windows and make as much noise as possible. Anna's eyes widened slightly, but she gave no other sign that she'd heard him. Joseph continued working on the ropes, his fingers finding the knots with practiced efficiency.
Military training included escape and evasion techniques, and he'd always been particularly good with restraints. The sound of approaching sirens began echoing through the warehouse district, still distant but growing louder. Joseph felt a surge of hope as he realized Detective Brooks had taken his message seriously and was responding with significant force. The guards looked toward the windows nervously, clearly not having anticipated police involvement. Joseph's phone rang again, Chen's voice now carrying an edge of fury that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Miller, you've made a serious mistake. My sources in the police department should have warned you about any official response to your situation. Maybe your sources aren't as reliable as you think, or maybe you're not as untouchable as you believe. Perhaps not, but I'm still holding all the cards that matter. Emma and Mrs. Garcia's safety depends on your complete cooperation. One phone call from me and your daughter dies before the police reach my associates." Joseph felt the last knot give way beneath his fingers. Anna was free, though she gave no indication of her changed status to the guards watching them. Joseph eyes and gave the slightest nod toward the windows. "Here's what's going to happen," Chen continued through the phone. "You and Anna are going to walk calmly to the roof access. My helicopter is landing in 2 minutes, and we're going to take a short flight over Lake Michigan. Unfortunately, mechanical problems will require an emergency landing that only I will survive." The plan was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. Chen would eliminate both witnesses while creating a believable accident that would generate sympathy rather than suspicion. Joseph realized that the businessman had planned for police interference from the beginning and had simply adjusted his timeline accordingly. The sirens were closer now, close enough that Joseph could distinguish individual vehicles. Detective Brooks was bringing serious firepower to this confrontation, but it might not
Enough to save Emma and Mrs. Garcia if Chen decided to cut his losses and eliminate everyone who posed a threat. Joseph made a decision that went against every tactical principle he'd ever learned. Instead of waiting for backup or trying to create a diversion, he was going to trust Anna Thompson to make the right choice when the moment came. "Anna," he said loudly enough for the guards to hear, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Anna understood immediately. She threw herself sideways, rolling away from the chair and toward the windows while screaming at the top of her lungs. The guards spun toward her, weapons raised, giving Joseph the opening he'd been waiting for. Joseph launched himself at the nearest guard, using momentum and surprise to drive the man backward into a support pillar. The impact was enough to daze the guard and sent his weapon skittering across the concrete floor. The second guard turned his attention to Joseph, but Anna had reached the windows and was smashing them with a piece of metal piping she'd found. The sound of breaking glass and Anna's screams echoed through the warehouse district, creating exactly the kind of chaos Joseph had hoped for. Police sirens responded immediately, growing louder as multiple units converged on the building. Joseph grappled with the second guard, using techniques he'd learned in military hand-to-hand combat training to neutralize the threat without permanent injury. Anna continued making noise at the windows, shouting information about Chen's location and the threats against Emma and Mrs. Garcia. Her voice carried across the industrial landscape, providing crucial intelligence to the responding officers. Joseph heard Detective Brooks's voice through a megaphone, coordinating the tactical response with professional precision. Chen's helicopter appeared overhead, its searchlight sweeping the warehouse roof as it prepared to land. Joseph realized they had perhaps 30 seconds before the businessman's escape plan went into effect. If Chen reached that helicopter, Emma and Mrs. Garcia would become loose ends that needed immediate elimination. Joseph's phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Brooks. "Units at Lincoln Avenue report subject secured unharmed. Chen's associates in custody. You're clear to proceed." The relief that flooded through Joseph was immediately replaced with determination. Emma was safe, which meant he could focus entirely on stopping Chen and saving Anna without the paralyzing fear of losing his daughter. The mission parameters had changed dramatically, and Joseph was no longer fighting with one hand tied behind his back. The helicopter's rotors whipped dust and debris through the broken windows as Chen's voice boomed over a portable speaker system. "Mr. Miller, you've cost me a considerable amount of money tonight. But business is about adapting to changing circumstances. Since my original plan has been compromised,
I'm implementing a more direct solution. Joseph could see Chen through the aircraft's open door, holding what appeared to be a detonator. The businessman's calm demeanor had been replaced by the desperate fury of someone watching years of careful planning collapse in a single night. This warehouse sits above a natural gas pipeline. One press of this button and the explosion will eliminate all evidence of tonight's events, including you and Anna. Detective Brooks's voice crackled through Joseph's radio, which he'd grabbed from one of the subdued guards. Miller, we've got bomb squad en route, but they're 15 minutes out. Can you buy us time? Anna grabbed Joseph's arm, her eyes reflecting new determination rather than fear. He's bluffing. David's too much of a coward to risk his own life in an explosion. The helicopter would have to be much higher to survive the blast radius he's describing. Joseph studied Chen's position, recognizing the telltale signs of a man who'd painted himself into a corner. The businessman was hovering barely 50 feet above the warehouse, close enough that debris from an explosion would definitely reach the aircraft. Either Chen was prepared to die rather than face prison, or Anna was right about his bluff. David, Anna shouted toward the helicopter, her voice carrying over the rotor noise. Rachel knows everything now. The police found your financial records, your communications about my disappearance, everything. Even if you kill us, she'll never marry you. Thompson Industries will never be yours. Chen's response was to lower the helicopter closer to the roof, his face twisted with rage. Rachel is a brilliant woman, but she's naive about business realities. She'll understand that desperate times require desperate measures once I explain the situation properly. Joseph made a calculated decision based on his assessment of Chen's psychology. The man was a corporate predator, someone who'd built his success on intimidation and manipulation rather than physical courage. Joseph stepped into clear view of the helicopter and began walking deliberately toward the roof access stairs. Where are you going? Chen demanded through the speaker. To end this. You want to detonate that device, you'll have to do it while looking me in the eyes. No more hiding behind intermediaries or hired muscle. Just you, me, and the choice you're going to have to live with. The helicopter followed Joseph's progress toward the roof, Chen's agitation visible even from a distance. Anna shadowed Joseph's movements, staying close enough to support him but far enough to avoid becoming an easy target. Police spotlights illuminated the warehouse from multiple angles, creating a dramatic stage for the confrontation. Joseph reached the roof as Chen settled the helicopter onto the landing pad he'd clearly prepared in advance. The businessman emerged from the aircraft clutching the detonator, his expensive suit torn and his usually perfect appearance disheveled by the night's events. You should have taken my money and walked away, Chen said, his voice shaking with exhaustion and fury. Now Emma grows up knowing her father died for a woman he barely knew. Emma grows up knowing her father stood up for what was right. She grows up learning that some things are worth fighting for, even when the cost is high. Chen raised a detonator, his thumb hovering over the trigger. For a moment, Joseph thought he'd miscalculated the businessman's desperation. Then Anna's voice cut through the tension with devastating precision. David, the detonator isn't armed. You never intended to use it because you're not willing to die for this scheme. You're just a thief who got caught, and now you're hoping intimidation will buy you an escape route. Chen's face crumpled as the bluff collapsed completely. Detective Brooks and her tactical team stormed the roof, weapons drawn and commands shouting through the night air. The businessman dropped the useless device and raised his hands, his corporate empire crashing down around him in spectacular fashion. Three months later, Joseph stood in the back of a Chicago courtroom watching David Chen receive a 20-year sentence for kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder. Rachel Thompson sat in the front row, her relief at her sister's safe return evident despite the devastating betrayal she'd experienced. Anna approached Joseph after the sentencing, her recovery from the ordeal remarkable but ongoing. The reward money from Thompson Industries should cover Emma's medical treatments for years. It's the least we can do after what you risked for our family.
Joseph smiled, thinking of Emma waiting at home with Mrs. Garcia, her breathing treatments funded by justice rather than desperation. Sometimes doing the right thing actually works out, though I'm planning to stick to regular custodial work from now on. Anna laughed, the first genuine joy Joseph had seen from her. Something tells me trouble will find you regardless of your job title. Heroes don't get to choose when they're needed.
More standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.